You reach across the table, you point, you tilt your head, and somehow the person across from you understands exactly what you mean. No words needed. You've been doing this your whole life without thinking about it. A raised eyebrow, a cupped hand, a glance held one beat too long. Before you ever learned a single word, before you knew what a word even was, this was how you communicated. And for the vast majority of human history, this was how all of us did. Language, the kind made of words and grammar and sentences, is extraordinarily new. Modern spoken language likely emerged somewhere between 50,000 and 100,000 years ago. Some researchers push it to 200,000, but your ancestors had been alive, hunting, cooperating, warning each other, raising children, and building communities for hundreds of thousands of years before that. So what were they doing? How did they reach each other without words? This is one of the deepest puzzles in all of human science. There is no fossil record for a conversation. You cannot dig up a sentence. What researchers have had to do instead is reconstruct the architecture of ancient communication from bones, stone tools, chimpanzees, infant behavior, and the faint marks left on cave walls. What they found is stranger and more sophisticated than most people imagine. Let's start where you always start, the body. Long before your brain could form a word, your body was already sending signals and receiving them. A flinch, a lean, an open palm. These aren't learned behaviors, they're built in. Researchers who study infant communication have found that babies as young as 9 months old begin pointing at objects to share interest with another person. Not to get something, not out of need, just to share. Look at that. Look at what I see. This behavior, called declarative pointing, is almost entirely absent in great apes. Chimpanzees can follow a pointed finger, but they rarely understand that the pointing itself is an act of sharing, an invitation, a reaching out across the space between two minds. Your ancestors understood this, long before words existed. Cognitive scientist Michael Tomasello, who spent decades studying human and primate communication at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, calls this capacity shared intentionality. It is the ability to understand that another mind has intentions, goals, attention, a point of view, and to deliberately align your own mind with theirs. This is not a small thing. This is the cognitive foundation on which all later communication rests. Without shared intentionality, there is no coordinated hunting, no teaching, no trust, no community, and shared intentionality does not require language. It requires attention. It requires reading another person's body, their eyes, their posture, and understanding what they mean. Your ancestors were doing this hundreds of thousands of years before the first word was ever spoken, and they were doing it, above all, with their hands. Michael Corballis, a cognitive neuroscientist at the University of Auckland, spent years building the case that gesture, not sound, was the original cradle of human language. His argument starts in the brain itself. Your language centers, the regions that produce and understand words, sit immediately adjacent to your motor cortex, the region that controls your hands and your mouth. These systems evolved together. The hand and the mouth learned to mean things at the same time. Corballis traced this gesture-first theory all the way back to your common ancestors with chimpanzees, noting that apes use intentional gestural communication far more flexibly than they use vocalizations. A chimpanzee cannot change its alarm call, but it can deliberately extend a hand, adjust a posture, or shift its gaze to communicate something different to a different individual in a different moment. Gesture is flexible. Gesture can be invented on the spot, and your ancestors, with their large capable hands and quick reading eyes, were extraordinary gestural communicators long before they said a single word. But gesture alone doesn't explain everything. Before words, your ancestors were also using sound, not language, something older, a sharp intake of breath when surprised, a low exhale when calm, a high soft sound made near a frightened child. These are not learned sounds. They are ancient signals wired into your nervous system, inherited from creatures far older than any human alive. Robin Dunbar, an evolutionary anthropologist at the University of Oxford whose social brain hypothesis reshaped how scientists think about why your brain grew so large in the first place, proposed something radical about early human sound. As human groups grew larger, physical grooming, the act of picking debris from each other's fur, could no longer maintain all the social bonds a community required. There simply weren't enough hours in the day to groom every person you needed to stay connected with. So sound took over. Humming, rhythmic call and response, laughter. The early human voice, Dunbar argued, was first and foremost a social bonding tool, a way of saying, I am here, I am with you, we are together and we are safe. long before it became a system for delivering information, not language, but something that carried meaning deep enough that words would have been almost beside the point. Now picture a scene. You are sitting at the edge of a camp in what is now Eastern Africa. It is roughly 150,000 years ago. The fire is burning low. Around you, perhaps 15 or 20 people. No one is speaking. There is no language yet to speak. But the camp is not silent. Across the fire, two women work together on a stretched animal hide, moving in rhythm, occasionally making low sounds in their throats. Not words, just tones that track the work and keep the space between them warm. A man catches your eye and holds up a sharpened hand axe, tilts his head toward the tree line at the edge of the clearing, raises his eyebrows once. You understand immediately. Tomorrow, early. You nod. A child nearby tugs on your arm and points into the darkness beyond the firelight. You don't ask what. You look where the child points. A shape shifts between the trees. You make one sharp, clipped sound. Not a word, but a sound loaded with unmistakable urgency, and the entire group is on its feet. This is not fumbling. This is not confusion. This is a communication system that works. It is just not made of words. And here is something that should give you pause. Even your closest extinct relatives were capable of far more than silence. In 1989, inside a cave called Kabara Cave in Israel, archaeologists uncovered a fossilized bone so small and so rarely preserved that most scientists had given up hope of ever finding one from this period. A hyoid bone. It is a horseshoe-shaped bone that sits at the base of the tongue and anchors the muscles required for the precise, controlled movements of spoken language. It almost never survives fossilization, but this one did, and it belonged to a Neanderthal who lived approximately 60,000 years ago. The bone was structurally nearly identical to your own, which means Neanderthal anatomy could have supported human range vocalization. The physical architecture for something like speech was already there, built into a being who shared a common ancestor with you roughly 600,000 years ago. Whether the neural wiring was sophisticated enough to control it, that remains one of the most contested questions in science. But the hardware was already built, and long before any of this, your ancestors were encoding meaning in the physical world in ways that still survive today. At Blombos Cave on the southern coast of South Africa, archaeologists found fragments of ochre, the deep red-orange mineral used for pigment, deliberately engraved with repeating geometric patterns. Crosshatches, lines, shapes with deliberate symmetry. These marks date to at least 75,000 years ago. This is not an animal scratching a rock. Something in your ancestor's mind understood. This mark means something, and I am making it so that another mind will find it and know what it means. That is communication. Silent, permanent, left in the dark of a cave for someone who would never share a single spoken word with the person who made it. Now here's the counterintuitive truth buried inside all of this evidence. You have probably always thought of communication as something that begins the moment language arrives, as if everything before words was fumbling and darkness and silence. But the evidence says something entirely different. Your ancestors were sophisticated, intentional, emotionally precise communicators for hundreds of thousands of years before the first word was ever spoken. They coordinated hunts across open terrain. They raised children and taught skills. They formed alliances and maintained complex social worlds. They expressed grief, signaled danger, and built trust, all without language, which means language did not create your ability to connect with other people. It amplified something already ancient, something already woven into the fabric of what you are, and that amplification is still running inside you right now. Think about the last time you sat across from someone in silence and understood exactly what they were feeling. Think about the last time a single sound from across a room told you everything you needed to know. Think about the last time you watched a stranger's posture shift and knew without a word exchanged that something had changed. That is not a modern skill. That is 300,000 years of evolution still operating in your body every single day. You were built to reach other people long before you had words to do it with. The first time an ancestor held out an open hand and another took it, something crossed the space between two minds. The first time a pointed finger drew two pairs of eyes toward the same dark horizon, a bridge was built. Language gave that bridge a name. But you reach across the table, you point, you tilt your head, and the bridge was already there.